Good morning, everybody. We will be doing Parshas Achrimos and Kedoshim. It's a double hitter. But we're going to go straight to the second Kedoshim, which you can find on page 656. 656. Now, there's a variety of mitzvahs mentioned in this week's parsha or parshiot. We have mitzvot that are known as ben adam lamakom, between between Jewish person and the Creator, observing the Shabbat, not worshipping foreign forces or idolatry. And then we have mitzvot which are ben adam lechavero, between humans. We have the responsibility of being sensitive to others. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Then there are ones that have been labeled as tzedek chevrati, and that is justice, but not just the responsibility I have as an individual, but there's a shift to communal justice. In other words, we have to understand that we do not just deal with the religion on a personal basis. We view ourselves as a community, and as a result we have a responsibility, taking care of those who are in need, establishing a judicial system. This parsha deals with many of those issues that fit into that category. And then there are those mitzvot that you will find that are known as the Mora Mikdash, fearing the Bet HaMikdash. Fearing, and the idea of fear is not the temple itself, but the being that's there, the sanctity, mitzvot that relate to Eretz Yisrael, and many others. I often mention the fact that Parshas Kedoshim is a parsha that tells us what our life is about. And just as a person's life is not predictable, and a person cannot wake up believing that today I will focus on specific mitzvot, because the reality is that things develop, the unexpected appears, and when the unexpected appears, you have suddenly a moral responsibility to deal with what is, not with what should be. And this parsha is really to guide us for life, that we are committed beings and committed Jews, not with the belief that we're going to focus on a specific area of our responsibility, but we must be broader, and we must have accept the fact that we're going to deal with surprises on a daily basis. However, we're going to start the parsha, read a few psukim, and then get into the main issue. Vaydaber Hashem, page 656. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Daber al Bnei Yisrael, speak to the assembly of Israel, Kol Adat Bnei Yisrael. Va'amarta alehem, tell them that you shall be holy. Kedoshim tihiyu. Now, what exactly does that mean to be kadosh? It is not so much to separate yourself. Sanctity in Judaism is not that you distance yourself from the world, but rather use it appropriately. Wine always symbolizes the greatest of all physical pleasures, and we are told, utilize it, use it appropriately, elevate it by using it for the sake of a mitzvah, for example, kiddush, kadosh, with wine. Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem, because I, your God, am holy, so therefore you go ahead and emulate me and follow those guidelines. And we are given several mitzvot here, honoring our parents, observing the Shabbos, not to turn to idols, which was a very tempting force that existed in the past, but in many ways I think still exists today, as we'll see, and not to create for ourselves these molten gods. Okay, the key section which we're going to be addressing today, actually is on page 658, and that is verse 5. Okay, now, here we go. When it comes time, when you want to go ahead and slaughter some kind of offering, a peace offering. So the Torah warns us here This is a very significant word in rabbinic tradition, a very significant word in understanding the message of the text. Lirtzonchem tizbachu. It should be done to find favor. Ratzon is something that I favor, something I desire. The service itself in the temple, that sacrifice that you bring, must be done liratzon, to find favor. And it applies, number one, don't leave the meat around for too long. So perhaps the simple understanding of the verse is that just as when you have a good meal for yourself, you're not going to eat meat that is 3 days old before refrigeration. So too, in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, do not bring an offering, do not eat the meat that is old and unpleasant. It should be something that's desirable. But the rabbis tell us that the word liratzon deals with the fact that there has to be intention. Meaning, you have to have kavanah. If a person brings a sacrifice, offers a sacrifice, slaughters it, carries the blood or sprinkles it, or performs any of the services in the Beit HaMikdash, but he is not mindful of what he is doing. Right? Imagine you're a Kohen. Imagine you've done it dozens of times, and you could do it half asleep. And there are many things that we do half asleep, like davening, for example. Right? Many of us have the ability to run through a Shmoneh Esrei, even if we had a very weak life, and we're still able to do it. It's just we've trained ourselves. So we are warned here that when it comes to sacrifices, lirtzonchem, be sure that it is done with mindfulness. Know what you are doing. A serious warning here. Fine. The next statement, verse 9, and I'm skipping to verse 9 because it's a new paragraph that deals with something very, very different, and that is gifts to the poor. And we are told, "Ubekutzrechem," when you reap the harvest of your land, at ksiratzachem, lo techale, you should not go ahead and complete your reaping, but rather you leave a pe'atzatcha, a corner in your field for the needy. Leket kitzircha, those, the wheat that falls during the process of the cutting of the harvest, let it stay there because there are people who are in need. Give them the opportunity to go ahead and to take from your field. Now, la'ani, and that's what we are told at the end of verse 10, la'ani v'lager ta'azov otam ani Hashem Elokechem. You should go ahead and leave it for the poor, for the people who do not have the financial support. That is what you shall do. So we have here two sections. Korbanot, where the warning is, be sure to be mindful of what you are doing. And this is God yelling at us, think what you are doing, be mindful of it. And then we have a next section, which in the text itself, we are told about things that you forget in the field. You harvest, right? You have some wheat that's left behind, a gift to the poor, it's a tremendous deed. And the rabbis derive from this the following, that if a person is walking, and a shekel falls out of his pocket, and he never realizes, does not notice that he lost the money, and a poor person finds it and purchases for himself a loaf of bread, you have performed a tremendous deed by filling the need of the poor. You have absolutely no idea. You will never know. Right? Sometimes there's a happy ending that 20 years later you hear about it. You'll never know about it. You are never going to be aware of the fact that you helped someone. Such a thing is a good deed. And you get a tremendous amount of reward because it fits into this idea of leket, of mitzvot, that the Torah tells you you have performed without being aware of it, period. So what we have here is the following. What the Torah is telling us by placing these two statements together is, number one, when you bring a korban, you be sure to be mindful. Think of what you are doing. Okay? Next statement. When you give charity, when your property or your money or your food helps others, even if you have absolutely no idea, if you are mindless, it's a wonderful thing. So that's what the Torah wants us to walk away from, the difference between the two. So what exactly is the purpose? In other words, so what's the message here? Fine, here I have to have intention, there not. But what's the idea behind it? What's the real message behind it? So, we know that there are many different approaches to our religion. different schools. And if you look at the Jewish world today, what I enjoy doing, and sometimes I'm guilty of stepping out of the Jewish world and observing what's taking place from the outside. Studying the people of Israel. They're very fascinating, for the record. If you ever do that, and you step back on any issue that's being discussed, on any issue, especially in Israel, because there everything is more lebedik and more like, but any issue of the different philosophies, a different type of kippah, the different views of anything, it is fascinating to step back and study and see where it comes from. Where do these approaches originate? And quite often you will see that they originate in the Talmud, that even in those days, most probably they had different schools. There's an attempt in schools I come from to place all the Talmud together, meaning to unify all opinions, And that really was the byproduct of the French schools of the 12th century, to unify the Talmud. What do I mean by that? If I would visit rabbis in the early 11th century or 10th century, so they practiced their Judaism, right? They had knowledge, but there was always this distance between the text of the Talmud, which guided them, and how they practiced, because there were many areas of the Talmud that were unclear. There were different versions. They weren't sure exactly how to read things. Some areas they knew more, some areas they knew less, but they didn't have a real handle on the Talmud. It was difficult to understand. The variation of the different girsa'ot, of the different readings. Right? We have this issue today, to some extent, with the Jerusalem Talmud, that there's no final version. So people who quote Jerusalem Talmud, there are times that there's a quote, and there are 6 different opinions of what the Jerusalem Talmud means. I always mention the crisis that took place a week before Purim in 1949. What happened a week before Purim 1949? So there's a statement in the Jerusalem Talmud. Jerusalem Talmud was not studied as much as the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud, we have this final edition that we've accepted, known as the Vilna edition. Fine, there's some mistakes there, but at least we have what to work with. The Jerusalem Talmud, we don't have that final edition. So there's a statement in the Jerusalem Talmud that tells us that, yes, if you have a walled city, you celebrate Purim in a walled city on the 15th of Adar. And so too, areas that are adjacent, the suburbs to this walled city, celebrate on the 15th as well. As the Yerushalmi, now what happens if there's desolation within the walled city? There's desolation within the walled cities. What's the status of the adjacent neighborhoods when the walled city does not have Jews there? So then, the Jerusalem Talmud seems to indicate that in such a case, if you do not have anyone in the walled city celebrating on the 15th, so then the suburbs have to celebrate on the 14th like the rest of the world. That's what the Jerusalem Talmud seems to say. Not a clear reading, but that was the traditional reading of the Jerusalem Talmud. And therefore, this reading became a serious crisis in 1949. Because for the first time in history, a very, very sad reality existed, that there were Jews in the neighborhoods adjacent to Yerushalayim, but there were no Jews in Yerushalayim. There were absolutely no Jews in the city itself. So, based on the simple reading of the Jerusalem Talmud, we have a crisis here, that they're going to have to start notifying, in 1949, of course they woke up a week before Purim, that they're going to have to notify everyone that from now on, we're going to have to celebrate Purim in Yerushalayim on the 14th. That would be a serious issue, and it will be a great crisis. So the rabbinic authorities of that time, Rabbi Herzog and others, dealt with it. And thank God, in essence, they came up with a way of rereading that Jerusalem Talmud, and with other explanations that they take into consideration. One of them was, Rabbi Herzog notes that if we're going to go ahead and announce to the world that in Jerusalem we are now reading on the 14th, because we have lost control of the old city, so there's going to be a feeling that we have lost hope for Yerushalayim, and we have never lost hope, he notes. We're still hoping to get it, which is quite amazing that he said that in 1949. They didn't change it, but what was interesting, what I'm getting out of that debate, is the fact that this statement in the Jerusalem Talmud created a crisis, and there was a debate, how do we read it exactly? So if we move back to the 12th century, 11th century really, Talmud was not so clear until one rabbi in France, right, living in the 11th century, develops a way of, in essence, explaining the Talmud and bringing Talmud to everyone. Any scholar that wants to know how to read it or which one is the appropriate version, you study Talmud with Rashi, with Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, a French rabbi in the 11th century. And as a result, Talmud became the way we address Judaism. It was the link. And he served, and he in essence changed Judaism because we have clarity, that we could turn to this text with clarity. Now he had children, and he had grandchildren. He had daughters who were scholars, and he had grandsons who were great scholars. And they go ahead and they added insight into their grandfather's writings. But what they did was a little bit more. Rashi would give us commentary based on the reading of the text itself. His grandchildren, more than anyone else, like Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Yitzchak and Rashbam, what they did is that they compare all sections of the Talmud. And if they read one section and on the surface it seems to contradict another section, they will come up with an explanation to explain that section A is talking about one scenario and section B is talking about another scenario. And suddenly that's how you develop halacha, because if you have an issue that is similar to the two topics that are discussed, you have to figure out, is it more similar to section 1 and therefore I will follow psak A, or B, meaning they combined all of the Talmud together. So that became really the philosophy of Judaism, that all of Talmud and all opinions shared on the Talmud are basically following the same line. Now, obviously there are many different rabbis there, but a generic statement in the Talmud, we in general assume that that generic statement will match all other generic statements in the Talmud. And they have to match, and if they don't, we have to find a difference between the two. That is the traditional approach. There are those more modern thinking, as that perhaps they come from different schools. Perhaps that statement was one school, even though it's generic. Now suddenly you're breaking it apart, but the result is, what you can do is you could clarify contradictions with a more scientific way. Well, one was based on school 1, one was based on school 2. Despite the fact that they're both generic statements, and generally we don't say that, it's a new way of thinking. Now this is more in the halachic area. I'm thinking that in hashkafic, in Jewish thought, there are different schools as well. Meaning, perhaps there were those, we have sections in the Talmud of practices that rabbis would avoid, something called zugot, that when things were in pairs, they would avoid them. That the rabbis even ask a question, how do you drink on the Seder night 4 cups of wine? You have an issue of pairs, you have 2 pairs there. Now, for some, some will explain it that it has some kind of supernatural effect. And then there are those that will say, well, it was superstitious. It was superstition that existed in that era, in that period. And the rabbis take it into consideration. So there are different schools. There are those statements in the Talmud that perhaps were affected by the culture where people were a little bit superstitious, or they addressed topics based on ways of thinking that existed in that era. And there are other sections of the Talmud that not. So different schools existed in the Talmud itself. Now with that, let's try to clarify what's taking place here. When I perform a good deed, right? Like, God wants me to bring an offering. I bring an offering to a temple. There are 2 ways to approach it. One way to approach would be, is that just as when I want to turn on my computer, right? I have to push a button, and I have to go ahead and double-click on a specific icon, and then I have my Word document and I can start writing. So therefore, what I have to do, I have to be very, very precise. If I don't click right where the icon is, I'm not going to open my page. So too, when it comes to spirituality, if I do not go ahead and practice things in a specific way, I will not achieve what is needed in the spiritual realm. Meaning, the spiritual realm is like a machine. The spiritual realm is like a computer. I have to press specific buttons, and then the operating system will work. That's one approach to Judaism, a mechanical approach, we'll call it. And then there is an approach that's that's more rational. And that is that, listen, God really, there's nothing intrinsic with specific mitzvot. What God wants you is to be linked to Him. The way you are linked to Him is by following that which He commands. So therefore, when I perform the mitzvot as they are mentioned in the Torah, it's not that they're having some kind of massive effect in the spiritual realm. It's not that don't view it mechanical. View it as you obeying this being. And if you obey him, you relate to him. And if you relate to him, you are like him. And if you are like him, you become a being of kindness. Because Hashem is Rachum v'Chanun. God is full of mercy. So we learn to be full of mercy. God gave us clothes. So therefore I learned that I should live close to the poor. God feeds us and feeds all of nature. So I'm going to be inspired to take care and make the world a better place. A very different approach. One of them is viewing mitzvot with something that intrinsically is valuable, and one is taking it as they have extrinsic value. They're not valuable on their own. Now remember, even something that's extrinsic, once you go ahead and do it for the right reason, they become valuable. It has a value because by doing it, I'm fulfilling what God wants me to do. And if I go ahead and adjust it with my own logic, I am no longer listening to God. So there's no major difference in how I practice the mitzvah, right? I observe Shabbat. I make Kiddush, right? Now, when I make Kiddush Friday night, I say to myself, listen, it is nice to go ahead and make Kiddush on wine, but this Friday night I am so exhausted, I really feel that I could feel more spiritual if I make it on a cup of coffee, right? In other words, what if that happens? That would cross my mind. I'm sure I'm not the only one. If I go ahead and do that, correct, and I'm thinking of God and I'm meditating and I sing my Kiddush beautifully, but once I make a decision how to do it, I'm no longer following him, I'm following myself. So we all agree, if you take extrinsic, intrinsic value, it doesn't really make a difference. But where is there a difference between the two approaches? And I think it works with the following. You know, recently, there was a picture circulating the internet, like recently. There's always something circulating that people are sending out. This internet and computers that saves us so much time, at the same time can also waste a lot of time. I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that, right? Either finding files or Narishkeit that's sent to us, and a few, the clips that we get that everyone sends us. The only one that feels like that? The only one that admits it, maybe? Maybe. Okay, so there's a lot of. Again, I'm a big fan. I'm a big chassid of the tool. I mean, I talk about the websites that I could use. I mean, I just came from giving a class, and I needed to show them a Rambam. So the idea that I could just find any Rambam in a second and put it on a board because it's linked to a computer is a tremendous tool. But there are things that occupy our time as well. One of them was a picture recently sent out by someone of a nice Torah Jew sitting on an El Al plane, but he was inside a bag. Like a bag that covered his whole body, and the bag was tied and he was sitting in it. And first, it looked odd. I mean, and you don't have to see it. It's not so, if you want, I'll forward it to you. But in any event. So what was the story behind it? So according to the reports, which doesn't really make a difference, he was a Kohen, and there was a concern that it's flying over a cemetery, so he put himself in a bag. Okay? Now, what would be, if someone would ask me, what would be the Torah approach to such behavior? In other words, is it something that, okay, there's a halachic issue, so I got to put myself in a bag to avoid perhaps a halachic issue? So what would be the answer? So again, I'm going to step out. I'm not going to give you what I think. I'm going to step out of the Jewish world again, and I'm going to tell you that there are different schools, there are different types of poskim, there are different types of rabbinic authorities. And based on based on their personalities or on their training or the type of yeshivat they went, your psak will be very, very different. In other words, there are those that are very traditional, and they say, listen, this is the letter of the law, and if it's the letter of the law and this is God, this is what God wants, you just ignore the world. And there are rabbinic statements that if a person is doing a good deed, he should ignore the world around him and just do what the Almighty wants. Okay, so that's one school that would say that this was a wonderful thing, that due to spiritual commitment, he went ahead and he bagged himself. Fine. Now, then there will be another approach from different types of schools that would say, you have to realize that you live in a world, that the world is important. And if people think you are nuts, that is something that is damaging as well. Okay, there's a story with one of the many Musar Yeshiva stories, many Musar Yeshiva stories, that one of the rabbis noted to the other one that when the Yeshiva Bachrim would take a train to Yeshiva in a Slobodka and the Mir, they would talk and learning. In other words, just in the Beis Medrash, the classic Beis Medrash is that you have the two young men with their stenders one next to the other and talking and learning, and the thumbs are moving, and they're arguing a little bit, and they raise their voice to clarify a position, which is necessary. It's impossible to understand the text without such a dialogue. So these boys on the way to Yeshiva, on the train, would do the same thing. So one of the Musar teachers said that it's not appropriate. In other words, on a train, you've got to train yourself to control your thumbs. And you've got to sit there and talk as humans do on the train. So this was something that was a Musar Yeshiva. In other words, an awareness that there is more than just the system. You're not living in your bubble, but rather you have to realize that there's a world out there. Be sensitive to them. And Haneg Bahem, react and interact with humanity, but keep your values as well. And therefore, to do something that is extremely odd, like thumbs moving in a raised voice, or sitting in a bag, is something that the Musar Yeshivas would not do. When they had this issue in Israel, and again, they had the issue with the women on the bus. I don't know if you've heard of it, that they send them to the back of the bus, which is mind-boggling. And again, it's people of a specific school, the extremes of these mindless schools, and often these are the people that take control of organizations, of situations, and are very destructive beings, which unfortunately we have. So they shared a beautiful story when this debate was raging there. They had a story about Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, a true story. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was a great Talmudic scholar, one of the greatest poskim of the 20th century, but a person who was sensitive and understood what it means to be a Torah Jew, but extremely committed at the same time. So how do you balance the two, right? Great commitment to the words of God, but great commitment to humanity and sensitivity towards others. So he's sitting on a bus. Fine? And one day a woman sat next to him. So he did not budge. And next stop, or the stop afterwards, he got off, but it was not his final stop, meaning he really was supposed to go another stop or two. But he got off. So one of the disciples asked him, what exactly does it mean? In other words, you sat there, but then you did not get off on your usual stop, you got off a stop or two earlier. And he explained that when the woman sat next to me, it wasn't ideal for me. But being not ideal for me is not enough to make her feel uncomfortable. If I would have stood up, she would have felt uncomfortable. So I couldn't do that. So what I did was I stood up and got off, which I'm allowed to, and then I just walked a little bit to be able to have God satisfied and be sensitive to humanity as well, to people as well. The balanced approach, and that's what makes a Gadol B'Yisrael, that's what makes a great person, a person that's sensitive to both. That's what Judaism is about. But there is a danger, and this returns to the point here. If we take korbanot, extremely important, right? Sacrifices. We talk about binyan Beit HaMikdash. If we view Judaism as something that's mechanical, if we view the fact that I'm a Torah Jew, you know why I'm a Torah Jew? Because I eat kosher. So therefore, if it's mechanical, it is very close to being like a cult. If you view Judaism as something that's mechanical, I do A, B, C, and I'm a member of that cult. That's what the result is going to be. In other words, some cults or some gangs, you have to have specific tattoos. Like you have to have a tattoo, a Zoy, and if it has specific letters, and then you're a member of that gang. Now, in a member in your gang, in your own neighborhood, you're a king. If you land up by mistake in the wrong neighborhood, you're dead. That's how it works. Because you remember, you're a somebody. So there are a few things you have to do late at night with the gang. Either break a few people's teeth or something, whatever it is, whatever is necessary. And then they mazel tov, they make you part of this fraternity, of this club. And that's what you are. You are a cult member in essence, because you're becoming mindless by performing specific acts. Judaism is very close to it. Any religion, by the way, is very close to a cult. If believing that all I got to do is say a few things and I'm a good person, right? If all I got to do is say a few Hail Marys and therefore I'm Baruch Hashem a committed a Christian. If Judaism takes that approach, it's very, very dangerous. If I believe that all I got to do is come to Jerusalem and bring the sacrifice, and that's what's being done. I bring the sacrifice, I see the Kohen slaughtering it, I see the sprinkling of the blood, and God, he says I'm atoned for, and now I live the life as I want. I am a member of a cult that's known as Orthodox Judaism. Welcome. Okay? Very, very, very dangerous. My brother told me that for some time as a student in yeshiva in Miami, he was sent to some old shul, and it was an old shul that was built with mafia money, and the old Gaboim told him that they still remember, I don't know if it was Bugsy Siegel or Meir Lansky, that would get aliyahs on Shabbos, right? Probably Shlishi. They would make me Shebeirachs, and on Sunday, they would not come to deliver the funds, the cash. It was always cash, the cash itself, but they would have these Italians that would go for them. And the way it works most probably is that they would give these Italians a list. That Sunday, kill the so-so long legs, shoot this guy, blow up that, and pay up my funds for a Misha Berach made at the synagogue. That's how it was viewed. Now, is that what Judaism is about? Well, that's why we are warned. Lir tzon chem. Be sure to be mindful. You have to be mindful of a mitzvot. I'll share with you a statement in the Talmud. Gadol ha'oset tzedakah. It is greater to do acts of charity, yoter mikol korbanot, more than all sacrifices. And there is a verse in Mishlei, aset tzedakah u'mishpat, performing justice and acts of charity is nifchar laHashem ezevach. It is more dear to the Almighty than sacrifices. And that's what we are being told here. When you do these korbanot, God wants them, but be mindful. They are a vehicle for spiritual growth. Yes, I go ahead and I sprinkle it in a specific way. And yes, I shake my lulav in a specific way. And yes, I hear the sounds of the shofar and I am careful that they are performed in a specific way. But if you think that I could just mindlessly become a member of this Judaism by just doing it, that's dangerous. And we are warned, lir tzon, to be mindful of it. Lir tzon, the rabbis tell us it means to have da'at, mitasek bekodashim. If someone inadvertently, if someone without intention performs any of these services, they are worthless and they are destructive. And that's what the Almighty does not want. And therefore we hear the prophets over and over again. Lama li rov ziv chachem. I don't need korbanot. For you to live your life and not learn a lesson and not to be linked to what I am really about, your korbanot are not what I desire. That's the message here. On the other hand, when it comes to good deeds, like giving charity, taking care of the need, bikur cholim, and all of those mitzvot that are rational, even if you're not thinking, if you do good things, the world is a better place. Even the coin that falls out of the pocket, if it goes out and sustains someone, even the grain that the person without realizing falls during harvest and the poor person lives off that, that is a good deed. It is valuable on its own. It's not there for a purpose. It is something that is valuable. They say, Rabbi Yisrael Salant, one of those Jews that had a major impact on elevating the status of our Judaism today. The mindfulness of why we are doing things. We have to give Rabbi Yisrael Salant credit for it. So he had a grandson. He had a grandson that was not observant. He had a son that wasn't observant who became a mathematician, a well-respected mathematician. He had a grandson that was not observant. But he had a very close relationship with the grandson. And one day he writes a letter to his grandson in Paris and says, "Are you able to keep kosher?" And he says, "No, I can't keep kosher here." He says, "There is one, kosher restaurant, but the way they spice the foods is awful there. I can't deal with the kosher food in Paris. So I go to a regular restaurant." So Rabbi Yisrael Salant says to him, "You know what? I have an idea for you. You purchase kosher meat, take it to the non-kosher restaurant, and let them cook it there and spice it for you. At least the meat should be kosher. And then you won't have to deal with the Jewish restaurant spices and the issues you have with the quality there, because you'll be bringing the meat." Now, obviously, rabbinic authorities do not recommend that people start purchasing meat in Sobeys and go to non-kosher restaurants. But Rabbi Yisrael Salant was here dealing with the following. He had a philosophy that there is no such thing as religious Jews and non-religious Jews. And if you think about it, the concept of religious, non-religious, in some ways is absurd. Meaning, are all religious Jews doing the right thing every day? Are we always careful with what we say? Are we always mindful? Next, are non-religious Jews not doing good things on a daily basis? You know, the amount of tzedakah they do, and the kindness that they do. So like, this concept of splitting the Jewish world, religious, non-religious, is ridiculous. Yes, there are important mitzvot like Shabbat, that we know that give us our identity. But to go ahead and use that and define the Jewish world into two parts, are they one of ours or again, is absurd. And therefore, Rabbi Yisrael Salant is telling us, the way we work with Judaism is, take wherever you are and make yourself better. You move forward. So if this grandson right now, if the meat is not kosher, I can go ahead and upgrade his observance by at least the meat being kosher. And this is something that is extremely important to how we view the Jewish world. There's no such thing. Everyone, whoever is a Jew, is a Jew. And every single Jewish person has the same job, to try to do more good deeds and to try to minimize the not such good deeds. And if we take and we have an understanding of what the essence of Judaism is about, and we realize that if you go ahead and perform good deeds that are not rational, you better be mindful of it. If you bring korbanot, if you go ahead and observe things that you can't explain why they are done, you better be careful because they are vehicles to make you a better person. And therefore there must be intention. The deeds, that's so many, the federations throughout North America, the amount of tzedakah that they do. In the land of Israel, the amount of organizations that are doing good things, observant, not observant. All these are mitzvot that are so powerful and so good and are in essence the essence of Judaism. And that's what the prophets are yelling out, right? Asot tzedakah, do acts of kindness. Are acts of kindness only done by observant Jews? That's not the case. Many of them do. So therefore, I think the idea of the Torah telling us, be mindful and careful when you do the irrational, but when you do good deeds, just do them, and when they are done, be happy. There's no need to have special kavanah. You realize, we make brachot. We make brachot when we do so many mitzvot. Why do we not make a bracha when we give tzedakah? There's no bracha asher kiddushanu b'mitzvos v'tzivano to give tzedakah. Why don't we do that? I call my mother. Right? Why do I not make a bracha? There are other prayers I say beforehand. But why don't I make a bracha? Why don't I make a bracha? Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvos v'tzivano mitzvahs kibud of va'em. You know why? To declare Asher kiddushanu is I'm saying the following. I would not do this. In other words, eating matzah Seder night, believe me, I would not do it. Why am I doing it? Asher kiddushanu, God commands me to do it. Right? So therefore, I have to think of God. I have to go ahead and declare that I'm doing it because of God. To go ahead and be kind to people, to do acts of kindness, to visit the sick, or to call my mother, those are things I don't need Asher Kiddushanu. I should be doing it. They are rational mitzvot. They have to be something that as humans we do. You are not doing it because God commanded. You are doing it because you are a decent human being. That's how the commentators explain. Doing what a decent human being should be doing is part of Torah. And it's the part of Torah where you don't have to focus as much. Just be kind. You don't have to think about it. Be nice to people. Do acts of charity. There's no need to meditate before it. It is nice to be mindful of the fact that there is a creator. And sometimes it assists us in giving. In other words, there are some people that if you give them cash, you're not doing them a favor. Right? Why? Because the cash you're going to misuse for cigarettes, alcohol, or other things. If you go ahead, on the other hand, and give them a Sobeys card, you know that they're going to be purchasing food for their family. So it's good to think, but the thinking is more how to do it to the fullest. But it's not a thinking, it's not a meditating of Asher Kiddushanu, of thinking the Ribbon Shalom. And at times, there's a story of one rabbi visiting another rabbi in the hospital. And the rabbi walks in and says, okay, how are you doing? And the rabbi in bed says, you're treating me like a lulav. In other words, you walk in, you are saying, how are you doing? And it's obvious to me that you're not really concerned about me so much. You are doing it because you want to have at the end of the day, you want to mark down that I did the mitzvah Bikur Cholim. I'm basically now an object. When you visit someone, the main thing we take into consideration is not God, is what the person needs. Sometimes you visit someone, you sit there for 15 minutes. That's what the person wants. Sometimes you visit someone and you realize that they're not, you pick up these things, and you realize that after 60 seconds they say, oh, thank you so much for coming. It means that they're not in a situation of having someone for a long time. So what you think about is not the creator, you think about the person. So these are the differences between the rational and the irrational, and this is what protects our Judaism from turning into a religion of flying into buildings. If we only take the Ribbono Shel Olam into consideration, and we only teach our children about Kiddush Hashem, and about how nothing is valuable in the world, there's a tremendous danger of our religion turning into something very harmful and destructive. If we remember our responsibility to the world, and sometimes the world makes it difficult for us, right? Sometimes they hate us, and the result is we ask, how are we supposed to value them? That delicate balance that Judaism deals with, of valuing humanity and at the same time realizing that, you know what, they don't really love, some of them don't really love us so much. We have to still be concerned about them. Something very unique that our religious demands. And it's far more complex, by the way, to be a rational being. But that's what we're being told here. You bring korbanot, do it, but remember why you are doing it. Do not do it in a random way. Be mindful of it. Then you grow. And on the other hand, when you perform the mitzvot that are good for the world, just do them. Don't think about it. No need for kavanah. No need for brachos. And that's how indeed we have a positive impact on the world. That's all, folks. Thank you so much. And everyone have a good day.